Hello, this is Lee Dunlap with the Indiana County Conservation District for the start of what will hopefully be a series of interviews throughout 2026 with community members and local experts to discuss what's happening in and around Indiana County. We'll be covering topics like bird migration, recreational access to our waterways, smart farming, and much more, and hopefully providing interesting local stories, maybe even some inspiration for county residents to get involved in conservation efforts. Today we have Ed Donley, retired mathematics professor, advocate for native plants, organizer of Plant Patrol. He's on the board of Indiana County Friends of the Parks, and he is an avid birder who hosts several bird outings right here in Indiana, PA. We'll be talking about his background in birding and a particular area of interest of his, the effect of invasive plants on migrating birds. So Ed, thanks for coming into the Discovery Center today.
Sure.
So can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got into birding?
I've always been interested in nature. My father was an avid hunter and interested in nature, so I was interested in that. When I was living in Virginia, I lived next door to an ornithologist who taught ornithology, that's the study of birds, at James Madison University, where I was teaching at the time. And he would take me out on outings, and I knew many of the birds by sight, but he knew them by their songs. So he'd walk through the woods and he'd mention all these birds that are singing. Wow! And I could picture them in my head. And that's what got me interested in birds in particular.
We're about to get into bird migration season here. Can you tell us what are some of the important, I guess maybe not important species, but species that you like to pay attention to? They're beginning their migration up north. What should we be looking out for? And if you're willing to share this, best areas for prime bird watching in the county?
Okay, so there are certain species that are migratory species that are declining significantly more than others, like some warblers and wood thrushes and some others. So these are important to pay attention to, and we don't know entirely why those particular species are declining faster than others. It's a multi-continental issue, so it could have to do with things going on here in the U.S., could have things going on in Central and South America, like, for example, rapid conversion of forest to farms down there. Could have to do with pesticides here. Could have to do with climate change and changes in weather patterns because they have to migrate through the air, and if there are big storms, that can throw them off and cause fatalities.
Yeah, that's something that surprised me about some of these bird species. They are traveling sometimes from Peru. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there are shorebirds that travel from the tundra in Canada down to southern South America.
Long way to go. Yeah. So yeah, whatever's going on down there could be affecting what's going on here.
Yeah, the songbirds mostly migrate to Central America or northern South America. But Swainson's thrushes, for example, migrate all the way down to Bolivia, which is Central South America.
How important, there's this term wildlife corridor that people use. How important are those, especially for these flyways? We're in the Atlantic flyway, so that's the migratory pattern of birds coming up our way through Indiana County. How important are these wildlife corridors?
So we're learning so much more about this recently because the radio trackers are small enough now to be able to put onto small birds. And so we're learning so much more about their flight patterns and about their how long they stop in different locations. And the whole flyway concept is kind of mixed up now because some species follow those three flyways, Pacific, Central, and Atlantic. Some of them come from Alaska, travel all the way across Canada to the east, and then travel south. And so what flyway do you call that?
Yeah, wow.
So we're learning a lot more now. We're also learning, which we knew about some species, that this is true of almost all species, that they have stopover places. Well, I shouldn't say almost all species. Some of them just fly straight through like mad and don't stop at all. But many species they stop over a particular location. They only spend 2 or 3 days flying and then maybe 10 days in a particular spot that's rich in food to renourish themselves. Migration is very stressful on birds. Some of the long distance migrants actually convert some of their internal organs. They steal from their internal organs for energy for flight, and then they have to recover those when they get back. And so they go through these physiological changes that are really severe in order to survive migration.
I know there are some websites that are really packed with data on this, like All About Birds, I think,
Yeah.
which is connected to the Merlin app.
Mm-hmm.
Can we see this? Can we see where these birds are stopping over, or is it kind of all over the place?
Well, no, we can actually track this. So there's a citizen science effort called eBird from Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where people can contribute their sightings. And this is not just in the US, so people do this all over the world. And you can look at maps of the sightings, and you can look at it chronologically, so you can see an animation of the map over time. So you can see the birds popping up in the spring in North America, and it's really cool to watch.
And these are just local, like, citizens who are uploading
Yes.
photos,
Yep.
recordings.
Yep.
And would you say it's really helpful for scientists to look at?
It's extremely helpful. So it's less reliable than expert scientists going out and doing the studies, but there's so much more data. It's a huge benefit to science.
Something we were talking about, you sent me a great article about this. There's a lot going on from point of origin where these birds are coming from, and like you said, they're stopovers until they actually get to their breeding grounds. And one of those things that you've mentioned is the effect of leaf out and the emergence of insects. How have the last few years weather patterns affected the leaf out, emergence of insects, and what's the impact on bird migration?
Yeah, so this is important in spring migration. Birds, 96% of terrestrial bird species in North America feed insects to their young. This includes things like hummingbirds that you wouldn't expect. And that's because their young need protein in order to build their body up, just like weightlifters need protein. And insects are a great source for protein, particularly caterpillars. Any larval stage of an insect is high in proteins and fats because they need that in order to metamorphosize into an adult. So they're building that up in their bodies. So birds, when they arrive on their breeding grounds, need caterpillars there. The caterpillars need leaves to feed on. So these three things have to be timed simultaneously so that the trees are leafing out, the insects are emerging in the spring, and the birds are migrating in. And if all three happen at the same time, that's great for the birds. The trees, older leaves on trees, they develop chemical resistance to herbivores. And so it's the young leaves that are the best for eating. And so many insects time their emergence to the leaf out of the trees. The young leaves are the best. And with climate change, there's interesting studies being done in Massachusetts because Thoreau kept careful journals of all these factors, all these issues, including other things like when the ice would break up in ponds and rivers. And he'd keep journals of all this back in the 1850s. And now people are doing the same thing and comparing the two. And there's a lot of variability between species, and also there's some variability between years, if it's a warm year or a warm spring or a cold spring. But in general, on average, the leaf out of trees happens 2 weeks earlier than it did in the 1850s. And insects tend to track with that. There's a butterfly club in Massachusetts, in Concord, that has looked at when adult butterflies, so some species of butterflies overwinter as pupa, and then they emerge as adults first thing in the spring. So they've measured that, and that pretty much tracks with the plants. The short distance migrant birds, the ones that come up from southern US, they know that it's warmer, and so they tend to come up whenever it's warm. So they tend to track with the leaf out, although it's not perfect and it varies with species. The ones that come from South America or Central America have no idea what's going on up here. And they come up basically the same time they did in 1850. And it's already been 2 weeks since the leaves have come out and since the caterpillars have come out. And some caterpillars develop into pupa in just a few weeks. So, and remember the birds have to lay eggs, and then their eggs hatch after a couple of weeks, and then they have to feed their young. And then their young, when they leave the nest, also have to feed, and they're still growing at that time. So there's a delay there after the birds arrive. It takes a few weeks before they need this protein, and they've already lost a couple of weeks. So that causes problems.
And you had mentioned one of my favorite bird species for obvious reasons, the cardinal.
Hmm.
You mentioned predation of cardinals. What's going on there?
Yeah, so in the spring, this was a study done in Ohio. Cardinals are one of the first songbirds to nest in the spring, and many invasive shrubs leaf out earlier than native shrubs. I actually use this technique on my own property. I live out in the country to get rid of invasive shrubs. In April, I can just look out and see them all through the woods and pull them out then, whereas once everything else leaves out, they're harder to find. But what cardinals do is the most fit cardinals are the ones that claim these leafed out shrubs because they seem more secluded and secure from predators. And so they nest there. But in the study, they found that there was a much higher predation rate for them. So there were 20% fewer fledged young early in the season when these cardinals were nesting in these honeysuckle shrubs that leafed out earlier. And then later in the season, that effect wasn't there. So they could nest in honeysuckle shrubs, non-native honeysuckle shrubs, or in native shrubs, and the mortality rate was the same. But they had lots of predation early on, and the authors think that it's because predators know to look in those. So in April, they look out in the forest just like I do, and they see these shrubs, and they go visit them and find the cardinal nests.
Nice.
So it turns out that the most fit cardinals are the ones that get predated the most, which is the opposite of the way natural selection should work. Now those cardinals do re-nest, and so they successfully have young later, but you lose that first batch of birds that way.
Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen with invasive plants, nutrition value for birds?
Yeah, so the invasive, so here in the east, the fall berries are mostly from shrubs that are not the sugar, not like blackberries and raspberries. Those are earlier in the season. So it's the shrubs like autumn olive, barberry, honeysuckles. They all have berries, and multiflora rose. They all have berries in the fall. And so birds need those to build up their fat content in order to make it across the Gulf of Mexico. There was a study done of Swainson's thrushes where they tagged them during fall migration along the Gulf of Mexico with trackers, and then they recaptured them later in South America. And they found that for the ones that were fat and that were flying during tailwinds, they had a 90% survival rate. For those that were lean, so they didn't have as much fat, or that were flying with headwinds against the wind, they had only a 30-some% survival rate. So the fat, the winds are important too. Sometimes they can judge that. They try to judge that along the Gulf when they first take off. But the weather, of course, can change while they're flying across. But the fat content is something that's controllable. So they need to eat. They need to build up their fat. And bird banders actually their skin is somewhat translucent of birds. You've seen this in chicken. Whenever you buy a chicken for food, you can see through the skin a little bit, and the fat is yellow. And so they can look at the bird's breast to see how much fat is there, and they can, without killing the bird. And that's how they determine if the bird's in good shape in the fall when they band them. And these berries from invasive shrubs, their fat content is very low, usually less than 1% fat content. The native shrubs, like the dogwood shrubs and also dogwood trees, viburnums, Virginia creeper, poison ivy, these all have higher fat content. I don't know why they do, but they have higher fat content, often almost 50% fat content. So if birds are eating those, then they will build up fat. And there was a study done, I forget where they were looking at, catbirds and thrushes, which includes robins and bluebirds and some other species, where they found that birds were preferentially going to native shrubs to get berries and avoiding the non-native invasive shrubs, even when the non-native shrubs were more numerous. Some birds are tricked, though, because those non-native berries are rich in carbohydrates. So they're like candy. So some birds eat those. Sometimes it gives them diarrhea, which is terrible because then they lose all that nutrition that they could have been building up for migration. It would be better for them to have not eaten at all. And so the native shrubs are very important. And it's important to get rid of the invasive shrubs. So these wildlife corridors you were talking about, it's important that they have, for fall migration, it's important that they have a lot of native shrubs in there.
So you mentioned honeysuckle, well, the non-native types. Have you seen any other non-natives that you'd encourage people with correct identification to weed out? Have you seen anything in the nurseries here that you're thinking, they probably shouldn't be selling that for one reason or the other?
Yeah, so barberry bushes are an interesting example. Barberry bushes produce these low-value berries, and it's been sold by nurseries across the whole region, not just in Pennsylvania, and very popular. I remember having them in my yard when I was a kid. My parents had them. But now they're being phased out, so the nurseries will be banned from selling them. And I think it's because of a study that was done on black-legged ticks. Black-legged ticks are the ones that carry Lyme disease in our area. And this study found that black-legged ticks tended to be more abundant under barberry bushes. They thought that was because there were more mice there who were hiding from predators, because barberry bushes tend to be fairly thick, and the mice carry the ticks. Shortly after this study came out, Pennsylvania put in this law that phased them out so that nurseries could sell whatever stock they still had, but eventually they won't be able to sell them at all. I forget what the date is, but it's coming up very soon.
Should we be ripping out our barberry plants from our yards?
Yes, I think we should. There are plenty of good alternatives. Indiana County Friends of the Parks, for example, has a native plant sale coming up, and we're including some shrubs in that, some native shrubs that produce berries. So you can get them from there. Beechwood Farms, which is an Audubon site in Harmerville, just north of Pittsburgh, they have native plants for sale. They have a sale in May and in the fall, but they also sell them throughout the summer. You can go and they have a huge variety. Nice plants at a reasonable price. There are also some native nurseries. There's a new one I haven't been to, but someone bought plants there for me. They're fabulous plants down in Washington County called Arcadia, I think. Something like that, Arcadia Nursery.
Some of the plants you mentioned, so you mentioned dogwood. That's a good choice for birds, you say?
Yep. So there are some non-native dogwoods, but some of the native dogwoods are gray dogwood, silky dogwood, red-stemmed dogwood, red osier dogwood it's also called, and probably a few others too. But also the flowering dogwoods that you buy, there's a small tree for your yard, those decorative ones, they're good too. That's a native.
And we have lots of plants surrounding the conservation district here that purposefully are planted here in our meadow for birds, for winter especially. Purple coneflower, gray goldenrod is another one. Are there any other perennial plants that you would say are good substitutes for the yard?
There's a huge number of those, so there are many dozens. You can buy, if you're planting a meadow that's kind of a natural looking meadow, you can buy seed mixes. Ernst Seed Company, for example, in Meadville sells them, and those are all native plants, and they have a couple of dozen species of wildflowers in them. Some are better for the food web than others. Doug Tallamy, who's an entomologist, he studies insects from University of Delaware, has plants that he calls keystone plants that are important for the food web, and among those are goldenrods and asters. People have bad feelings about goldenrod because, for one, they think that it causes hay fever when it's ragweed, right, that does that blooms at the same time. But also there are a couple of species of goldenrod that are very aggressive. So when you go see an overgrown field, or a farmer's field, you'll see a huge field of goldenrod there. That's one of those ones that spreads aggressively by rhizomes. There are other species that spread slowly by rhizome or don't have rhizomes at all, and you can plant those. They support 117, I think, species of caterpillars. They support 8 species of native bees. So some bees are specialists. They only collect pollen from specific species to put in with their eggs when they lay their eggs, because when the eggs hatch, their larvae will feed on that pollen. So goldenrod is one of those. Plus, in the fall, like migrating monarchs need fall flowers, and so goldenrod and asters are good for that.
I think we have some milkweed out there in the meadow too.
Yep. So yeah, so milkweed, as most people know, is monarchs specialize on that for their caterpillars. And 90% of caterpillar species are specialists, like the monarchs are. So they only feed on certain species of plants as caterpillars. The adult butterflies are more generalists, but most of the caterpillars are specialists. And the caterpillars, remember, are important for the birds because of their high fat and protein content. So it's important to plant native wildflowers and native trees to support those caterpillars.
Good segue. My last question here is about ways that people can get involved. If they want to become birders, if they want to help out, what can people do individually?
Okay, well, one thing you can do is right in your own yard. You can plant native plants and not use pesticides. So they've done studies for gardens that you don't notice predation on the leaves of your plants if it's only up to about 10%. When it gets devastated, that you notice by insects. But most insects don't devastate your plants. They just eat some of the leaves. And so it's important to not use pesticides. It's important to plant native plants. I only mentioned goldenrod, but there are a bunch of other examples like that. And you mentioned milkweeds. So you can plant native plants, take out your invasive plants, especially shrubs that form berries, because the birds that do eat those berries will poop out the seeds somewhere else and spread the shrub to other places. So you can get rid of those. If you want to help out with invasive plants in our parks in the county, you could join Plant Patrol. Go to plantpatrol.org, and we have volunteer groups. We're an all-volunteer organization. We go out to different parks in the county and remove invasive plants there. You can also contribute to eBird if you know your species of birds. Even if you only know a few of them, you can still contribute to that. Go to ebird.org. If you do know birds, there's an atlas every 20 years. The Game Commission and some partnering conservation organization creates an atlas of birds, and we're in that period now, a 5-year period, where we're collecting data on what birds are here. Usually it's a breeding bird atlas only, but this time they're also doing a winter atlas, so that ends the end of February. But if you see birds nesting in your yard or nesting somewhere else, put it into eBird, and they're keeping track of. Scientists will look at this to see how it's changed over the last 20 years and over the last 40 years.
The last thing is March. You have some events that you have coming up. You're doing outings. Where can people find those, and do they sign up for them?
Yeah, so if you're interested in birds, the Todd Bird Club is the local birding club. You can either join them, or without joining them, you can just come on our outings without being a member. Joining is very inexpensive. It's like $5 or $10 a year, but you don't need to join. And you can come to our meetings without joining as well, where we always have a presentation. Right now, we're working on the Winter Atlas, and it's just a few individuals going out here and there. I'll be going out tomorrow and Sunday in 2 different locations. But if you go to toddbirdclub.org or just do a Google search for Todd Bird Club, you can see when our outings are for this spring, and you can just show up to them. You don't need to sign up. Our next meeting is, we meet the first Tuesday of every month and in the evening, and our next one is, I'm doing the presentation. It's also part of America 250 for the county. I'll be talking about what it'd be like going birding in 1776 here in the county, in what's now Indiana County. So we'll look at what trails were available for us to walk on, what species of birds were here then that aren't here now, what species of birds are here now that weren't here then. Part of that's due to climate change, they're more southern birds. And look at places where we can spend the night, because we'll have to, in this fake outing, we're going to have to go by horseback and take our guns with us so we can shoot the birds, so we can look at them up close, which is what they did back then. So I'll talk about all that.
Thanks so much. Thanks for all the information. Thank you for coming into the Conservation District. And if anybody has any questions about birds, conservation efforts in general, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram and just write in with your questions. Thanks again, Ed.
Okay, thank you, Lee.